Good morning to all people here. I am Maria Silvia Calvo, official of communication of UNDP Paraguay, and I have the honor of joining this space of Dialogue of Action Paraguay 2022, carried out by Paraguay as a member of the Global Alliance for Effective Development Cooperation. At the national level, the Interinstitutional Technical Committee supports this space for non-reimbursable international cooperation integrated by the Ministry of Finance, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and the Technical Secretariat for Development Planning. Today we will have the opportunity to share some reflections on the situation of follow-up and monitoring of development cooperation, specifically in the case of the cooperation framework signed between the Republic of Paraguay and the United Nations. Before beginning the presentations, we would like to comment that the Global Alliance for Effective Development is a multi-sectoral platform interested in maximizing the effectiveness of all forms of profit-seeking development cooperation shared by the people, the planet, prosperity, and peace. It brings together governments, bilateral and multilateral organizations, civil society, private sectors, and representatives of parliaments and unions, among others. They are committed to strengthen the effectiveness of the alliances in the 23 Agenda. After the presentations, we will have a space for questions and answers, for which you can send us your questions in the chat. First of all, we will listen to representatives of Interinstitutional Technical Committee, CNRCTA, who will give us some opening words. We begin with Vice Minister Adilio Celins Fran, Deputy Minister of Planning of the Secretariat of Economic and Social Development Planning. He is in charge of the coordination of the Technical Secretariat. He is an economist with more than 10 years of investment and public policy experience. He led, alongside other authorities, the updating of the National Development Plan 2030. He is a promoter of several actions that seek improved public management, as well as a linking and application of the objectives of sustainable development of the National Development Plan. He also worked at the Inter-American Development Bank as an economic consultant for public-private alliances. We give the words to the Vice Minister, please. Please go ahead. Well, good morning. It is a pleasure for me to share this space. I want to start by greeting the colleagues who share the table with me. Mrs. Marta Medina, Director of International Cooperation of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and a great friend for several years now. Mrs. Marta Molina, Head of Cooperation of the Department of the Debt Policy of the Ministry of Finance, and also a friend, and with whom I have shared several academic spaces. Also to Mr. Victor Vidal, Coordinator of Projects of Governance at the UNDP, and in his name to the institutions that represent today. Representative of embassies and cooperation agencies, members of the Monitoring Evaluation Group of the cooperation work of the United Nations, and also to representatives of the civil society. In representation of the Technical Secretariat for Development Planning that coordinates the Interinstitutional Technical Committee for the management of the non-reimbursable international cooperation, I give you the warmest welcome to the Dialogue of Action 2022 of Paraguay. within the framework of the Global Alliance for the Development for Effective Development Cooperation. The objective of this space is to reflect together with the main actors of international cooperation on the current situation of follow-up and monitoring of the cooperation for development, proposing a case study of the cooperation framework for sustainable development 2024 between the Republic of Paraguay and the United Nations. Strategic programming instrument that describes the agreements established between the parties to contribute to the national development priorities included in the National Development Plan This is aligned with the SDGs in 92%. The mechanism for evaluating the implementation of the framework of cooperation is in charge of the Monitoring and Evaluation Group, where the SCP has the role of collider as the institution responsible for the UNDP Paraguay and coordinates the Interinstitutional Technical Committee for the management of non-reimbursable international cooperation. This group aims to provide technical assistance to the National Steering Committee and results groups in monitoring, reporting, and evaluating the framework. At the beginning of this year, the first evaluation meeting was held in which it was agreed to hold a working group and review the indicators from the National Development Plan and the cooperation framework. On this day, we want to share with you the advances in this sense with the purpose of jointly measuring and transparent the impact of the work carried out by the United Nations in Paraguay, assumed by the country with the 2030 agenda. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Vice Minister, for the words. Now we will listen to Mrs. Marta Medina, Director of International Cooperation of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Marta Medina Zorrilla is a notary lawyer and notary public from the National University of Asunción. She completed her graduate studies in Commerce, Foreign Affairs, and Economic Integration at the University of Southern Cone of the Americas and Pedagogical Training for Graduates. Completed a postgraduate degree of Strategic Planning and Management from the High Strategic Studies Institute of the National Defense Council. She's a diplomatic with 25 years of seniority. She served at the Embassy of Paraguay in Mexico and Peru. She has held several positions during her career in foreign relations and currently serves as Director of International Cooperation. Now, please, Mrs. Marta, we invite you to give some words. Good morning, everyone. First of all, I would like to say hello to the people here on the table, Vice Minister Adilio Cele, great friend of mine, Victor Vidal from UNDP, and all the authorities of UNDP, and Marta Molina, and especially to my team from the International Cooperation Department led by Belén Avalos and Brian Kennedy, who are following the event virtually. First of all, I would like to greet everyone else. I know this is getting long, but I'm going to say hello to my colleagues, members of the CTA, and Gisela Di Modica, and Osorio, who is surely following this virtually. well represented by Marta here, also the representatives to other institutions of the STP and the Ministry of Finance, the representatives of the United Nations agencies in Paraguay, representatives of cooperation institutions, private sector, academia, and civil society. It is also a source of great joy for me to be able to participate with you of this Action Dialogue Paraguay about the effectiveness of development cooperation, multi-stakeholder alliances for sustainable development between Paraguay and the United Nations organizations. This event seeks to bring together the different actors in the country to build a shared understanding about the importance of effectiveness of cooperation and to expand partnerships and maximize the impact of the objective proposed by 2030 agenda and the national plan for development. And in this particular case, the objective is to share good practices in the cooperation between different actors, identifying the challenges and opportunities that arise from this process, and therefore to be able to continue working on the strengthening of the alliance. As a member of the Interinstitutional Committee, I confirm my willingness to continue strengthening our ties and renewing our alliance to face common challenges. It's my wish that we have a fruitful day, and please feel welcome. Thank you very much. Thank you so much to Minister Medina. Now we're going to start the presentations that our colleagues prepared for today. In the first place, we have Marcelo Amarilla from the SCP, who will speak about the current situation of monitoring and cooperation for development. This is a case study between the Republic of Paraguay and the United Nations. Marcelo Amarilla Esquivel is an economist from the Faculty of Economics of the National University of Asunción. He completed a master's degree in government and public management at the American University. He works as General Director of Management for Results of the Planning Technical Secretariat. He worked for 10 years in the General Direction of Statistics, Service, and Census, now INE, where he was part of the team that developed the strategy, signed the national strategy that developed the national strategy for statistical development. He's also a professor of microeconomics at the Faculty of Economics. We invite Mr. Marcelo to give his presentation. In a moment, we'll be with Mr. Marcelo. He's with a few connection problems, but in a little while, Mr. Marcelo Amarilla will be giving his presentation. Good morning, Mr. Marcelo. If you please open your microphone and we will test it if everything is okay. Your camera too, please. Your microphone and camera. Okay, so while we solve the technical difficulties, we will move on to the next presentation. In representation of the group of monitoring and evaluation in the framework cooperation between the Republic of Paraguay and the United Nations, we give now the floor to Mr. Victor Vidal. He's the project coordinator of governance of the governance for portfolio of UNDP Paraguay. He's a lawyer graduated from the National University of Asunción. He's Master of Laws from the National Autonomous University of Mexico. He held advisory positions, legal and project coordination positions in the public sector, and has been a consultant and legal advisor to private entities. Please, Victor, go ahead. Good morning to all of you. Mr. Vice Minister of the Technical Secretariat, Adilio Cele, Marta Medina, Director of Cooperation, Mrs. Marta Molina, Head of Cooperation of the Ministry of Finance, colleagues from the different state entities and agencies that are here today or connected to this event, colleagues from the United Nations system in Paraguay, cooperation colleagues, ladies and gentlemen who are with us in this event. It's a great honor to be able to address to you. In this case, it is my task to refer to the cooperation framework for sustainable development between the Republic of Paraguay and the United Nations from the perspective of the United Nations Task Force in Paraguay. The framework of Cooperation 2020-2024 is the strategic programming framework of the UN in Paraguay that describes the agreements established between the government of Paraguay and the UN to contribute to the priorities and the achievement of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development Goals. Please, can we see the slide? As you can see here, this is the first document to have been signed in Latin America after the reform of the UN Sustainable Development The General Assembly, it constitutes the joint effort, the joint frame of reference for the entire system of the United Nations in Paraguay. This framework represents, first and foremost, the renewal of the commitment of the UN to the country, the institutions, and all the people. In this context, we cannot fail to mention that the framework was signed in February 2020, less than a month later, after the pandemic, where we know that the pandemic had altered all the plans and projections in the world. In the country, the arrival of the pandemic constituted the main challenge for the implementation
actividades y recursos e inició la parte más importante de la cooperación con el Estado paraguayo durante 2020.
Despite the context, the organization started the implementation of the cooperation, quickly rescheduled activities and resources, and started the more important part during 2020 and 2021. All of this was aligned, of course, with the SDGs and the National Development Plan of the 2030 agenda. The national priorities identified in the National Development Plan, Paraguay 2030, constituted the central reference for the identification and alignment of the priorities in which the United Nations works in Paraguay. In this regard, I take this opportunity to highlight and express the congratulations of the system of the UN to the country due to the fact that the National Development Plan 2030, as we can see in the graph, is aligned with the Sustainable Development Goals in a very high percentage that is estimated at 92%. Plus, implementation of the cooperation framework began in coincidence with the decade of action to meet the Sustainable Development Goals, of which we find ourselves, and is a central priority for the UN system. Without a doubt, this constitutes an opportunity to multiply efforts and work in a highly coordinated and integrated manner towards the objectives of sustainable development. In this graph, you will see how the three columns coincide with the main axis of the Sustainable Development Objectives and also with the priority areas of the cooperation framework 2020-2024. As we said, the fact that this is the first one signed in the region with the new principles is partially because of the cycle of planification, but most importantly, is a direct consequence of the extraordinary and efficient alliance between Paraguay and the UN. The framework pushes the joint work between the 18 specialized agencies of the UN in the country. In that sense, we want to reiterate our gratitude for the contributions received from all the organizations and state entities, and of course all agencies and offices of the UN in Paraguay, and especially highlight the commitment of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the Technical Planning Secretariat and all other instances as well of civil society that participated in this construction process. The cooperation framework was elaborated by the Paraguayan government and with a consultation process with civil society, organizations, international organizations, from the government organizations, non-government organizations, academia, and private sectors. You can see here the added value of the alliances with the public administration, the private sector, all of them collaborating according to the SDGs here in Paraguay for the fulfillment of the objectives of the National Development Plan. The cooperation framework includes a governance mechanism that includes a National Joint Steering Committee as the highest governance body, co-led by the National Council and the resident coordinator of the United Nations. We can see that on the next slide,
A
please.
su vez,
In turn,
cuatro grupos
there are
de
4
resultados,
groups of results
los que trabajan las líneas
that work
temáticas del marco de cooperación,
the
en el primer
thematic
lugar,
lines of the
busco
cooperation
resultados de
framework.
social, personas, sostenibilidad ambiental, planeta,
We can
desarrollo
see
económico,
here
justicia,
people,
prosperidad,
environmental sustainability,
paz y justicia.
planet, inclusive
Y también,
economy,
está
development,
presente el grupo de
prosperity,
monitoreo y evaluación.
institutional peace and justice. It also presents the
Los cuatro
monitoring
grupos
group,
de resultados,
monitoring and
como dijimos,
evaluation
abarcan
group.
cada una de las cuatro de las
This group
ideas
of results
específicas del
cover
marco de
each of the
cooperación.
4
Lo que
strategic
es
priorities
muy
of the
importante,
cooperation
haciendo
framework.
referencia al grupo de monitoreo y
And
evaluación a efectos de lo que
what is very important to highlight
el mismo es clave para el monitoreo del
is that this
progreso
is
en la
key for
implementación
the
y el reporte
monitoring
del
and
avance del
evaluation
marco de cooperación.
of what we have
Asimismo,
in the
lo ha mencionado
cooperation
también
framework.
el viceministro Cele, recientemente este año se ha hecho nuevamente
Vice Minister Seller recently
un trabajo a su vez de
has mentioned
priorización de
that
acciones donde nuevamente
that
participativamente los organismos y entidades del Estado,
state agencies and agencies, funds and programs of the United Nations have identified in each of the 4 groups of result the actions
corto plazo
which are the strategic priorities in the short term
los esfuerzos conjuntos.
to unite and further promote joint efforts.
De que el trabajo de este grupo, como
We are
parte del
convinced
mecanismo de
that the
gobernanza
work of this group,
marco
as part of the mechanism of governance,
de monitoreo, ayudará a medir
the monitoring group, will help
el impacto de la labor que desarrolla las
to
Naciones
measure the impact and the work carried out by the United Nations in Paraguay in collaboration with the government.
la construcción de indicadores.
It should be noted that the construction of indicators, can we see the next slide please,
Y el seguimiento de los
and the
resultados
monitoring of results
para
are key to
el monitoreo de progreso,
ensuring monitoring of progress,
resultados y la cultura,
promoting result-based management and the culture
fomentar
of
la
evaluation,
información oportuna y promover el uso de conocimiento, lecciones aprendidas y buenas
contribute
prácticas
the
en
accountability,
el estilo de vida
and promote the use of lessons learned and good practices throughout the life cycle of the cooperation framework.
del marco, incluyendo
The indicators in the context of this framework, including baselines and targets,
de la STP y del Instituto Nacional de Estadística, el grupo de monitoreo y evaluación
are possible thanks to the leadership of the STP
y metas
and the National Statistics
del marco,
Institute.
que en su mayoría, y nuevamente lo que decíamos antes sobre la alineación de este instrumento, fueron tomados directamente del Plan Nacional de Desarrollo
This,
y en algunos casos
this tool,
a las
as we said before,
de los
is aligned to the National Development Plan
finalmente
and in some cases correspond to the national goals
gobierno de Paraguay y especialmente a la
and the Sustainable Development Goals. Finally, we
monitoreo y evaluación
reiterate our gratitude to the Paraguayan government and especially to the member institutions of the Monitoring and Evaluation Group,
de este
to the STP led by the SDGs Commission, Thank you very much, Victor. Very interesting. Well, and now we solved the technical problems, and we give the floor again to Mr. Marcelo. Go ahead, please. Good morning, everyone. My apologies for the problem we had with the connection. Can you confirm if you can hear me? Thank you very much. This will be a short presentation of the work being by the Group of Monitoring and Evaluation in this framework of Action Dialogue Paraguay 2022. First off, I would like to highlight that This monitoring of cooperation framework of Paraguay and the United Nations are integrated by multi-stakeholders. The first step already mentioned by Vice Minister Adilio, we find ourselves in this period of 2020 to 2024. Last year we updated the National Development Plan. Priority objectives are already contemplated here. We had ambitious indicators and goals for the long term up to 2030. The actions are a consequence of the involvement and participation of state agencies and also civil society and international cooperation. We include here a fourth axis to the national plan where we can see the need to strengthen the institution of the state for the implementation of the National Development Plan. As well as the colleague who preceded me presented, we mentioned that each one of the axes of the National Plan of Development are present here. There is a fairly high and important alignment since the compliance with the National Development Plan. This alignment we can see not only by transversal axis, but for each one we can already identify which are the sustainable development goals directly linked to each. Also, an innovation that has the updated national plan is the incorporation of a specific objective where the importance of cooperation for the sustainable development is recognized. We see each channel's resources to complement each other and the national efforts in those areas that have been defined as priority areas. We begin to work this year as the monitoring group. We rescued the construction of this framework was made between the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the United Nations, the STP, and other institutions. And the framework is done by looking at the National Development Plan, looking at the sectoral development plans, and also the institutions that have a say and they collaborate in the achievement of those priority actions that we define as a country and collaborates. In that case, we avoid duplication of actions. The efforts are better channeled and then more effective, and we have more effective cooperation at the national level. Approaches are improved, and therefore, above all, cooperation is also encouraged. Therefore, we see an add value with this framework because they articulate the initiatives of 17 agencies of the UN. So the intervention is more effective. So as a group, we revised the indicators. We saw the alignments with the updated plan. So from there, We did a linking exercise. We saw more than 38 indicators that correspond directly to what today are part of the National Development Plan, and we also identify each one of the indicators for the groups of results. That exercise helped us, first of all, to identify the gaps we saw. We saw where we have lags that are more noticeable, and also that help to generate a link of how much budget today the state dedicates to each one of the specific objectives of the National Development Plan. This is very important when it comes to proposing new ways to focus the international cooperation precisely in those objectives or indicators where perhaps the progress is a little slower, so we can have a more efficient cooperation, more effective cooperation, so the state can redirect resources. This is all from me. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Marcelo, for your intervention. Good thing that we were able to solve the inconvenience. And now we open a space for dialogue in which the members of the table here will respond to the questions that we are receiving. So I'm going to ask the questions, and then please some of the members can respond. The first question we must ask: did you identify any good practice or lesson learned that might be useful in monitoring or in follow-up cooperation as an instrument? I'm taking the answer myself. Although I might be not very much versed in the topics, well, in this case, it's important to emphasize that this exercise itself of working with the United Nations system in the framework of cooperation and follow-up on what I call cascading. We have the SDGs, we have the National Development Plan, we have various other plans and programs in the government, so it is a very good practice to have all this teamwork in which they evaluate which indicators can be taken and which indicators can be associated with the cooperation framework to the national objectives. So this is a work in progress. It is one of the activities that are carried out within the framework of monitoring and follow-up. So I think we will have soon enough something that we can publish. Next questions. What are the elements or mechanisms to highlight that are included in the framework cooperation agreement? It is fair to highlight that the process itself included in the cooperation agreement has had a consultative and participatory dialogue with more than 190 entities, civil society, international cooperation agencies, other entities. This instrument, without a doubt,
de seguimiento y también de evaluación
as entire process of implementation
ese diálogo
includes the dialogue with the actors involved, internal and external.
nos manda o que nos orienta a buscar los objetivos de desarrollo siempre en alianza con todos los sectores de la sociedad.
Actually, the SDG 17 commands us or guide us to seek always the SDGs in alliances with all sectors of society. Thank you very much, Victor. Another question: what are the recommended mechanisms to strengthen the process of implementation of the Agenda 2030? Good morning. What are the mechanisms at the country level? We have an instance that is the SGD's Commission of Paraguay. That is an interinstitutional body integrated by more than 17 public institutions. And it's a space of articulation for the promotion of the Sustainable Development Goals. In this sense, this commission seeks alliances, both with the private sector and organizations of civil society. Another of the mechanisms that we have for the implementation of the SDGs is the link between the goals and with the country agenda, as my colleagues commented, which is the National Development Plan. We have 155 goals that we see in the Sustainable Development Objectives that are in direct correspondence to the SGDs. Another question: what are lessons learned up until today, and which commitments remain most relevant to the government as well as to partners and stakeholders, national stakeholders, in the current context? Mr. Marcelo. Regarding the lessons learned, we observed that this work that we did, mainly in the measurement of the joint actions with the United Nations and all its agencies, it's identify the gaps, identify those gaps, and also identify perhaps where the cooperation is more or less efficient, so we can channel cooperation in those indicators or objectives where there is still some lethargy for its fulfillment. Thank you very much. Mr. Adil, I don't know if you want to add something. Perfect, thank you. That was the last question that we had. So in this way, we're going to give closure to this part of the agenda. They're telling me that there is one more question. Okay, I'm sorry. We have one more question. Any challenge that you want to tell us about? Considering that the process involved many public and UN institutions as well as other actors. Well, one important challenge, once again, we said this before. One challenge was that this instrument was signed in February 2020, before the pandemic, and therefore the time frame of 2020-2024 coincide barely a month with this context.
de poder, dentro de este marco
Nevertheless, this context has pushed a sample of
se consolidó en
the relevance of a joint action, collaborative action,
y ya felizmente estando en fase de
and happily
pandemia,
in the post-pandemic phase,
fuerza haber retomado ya
we reassume the effective implementation of all the governance mechanisms
en los 4 ejes temáticos, como habíamos comentado también, incluso
above the,
acción
under the 4 axes,
de las acciones en las cuales
as we commented before,
en la intensidad de
with specific prioritization, I'm sorry. Another question. Both the cooperation agreement and the national instruments, do they share common objectives in terms of inclusive multi-stakeholders alliances through which they seek to collaborate with actors involved in development, such as the private sector, civil society, among others? This is a very good question and very specific. I think we're going to have to take this as homework and review it in detail. I do not know if any of the technical members of the team has a specific response, but we can say that most of the indicators that are now evaluating, there is a very high alignment both between the SDGs and the National Development Plan and the cooperation framework. So this is very important. And we have one last question. Could you tell us if the state had any similar experience with the international cooperation? Well, actually, I don't remember any similar experience of something with this big and with multi-stakeholder approach. I will dare to say that this is the first time in which we do something jointly articulated between the UNDP and international institutions. That is why this space constitutes an enriching experience. That will be my answer. So we have answered all the questions. Thank you very much. And now we are reaching the end of this part. I am thankful once again to all people who shared with us, who participated of this dialogue. We close this meeting with a few words of closing words from Mrs. Ana Osorio, Director of Policy of the Ministry of Finance, please. Good morning, everyone. Good morning, Vice Minister. Good morning, Director Marta. Good morning, Mr. Victor Vidal. Good morning to all people here, representatives of international cooperation agencies, and also state entities. Good morning to the members of the Technical Committee Interinstitutional for the Management of International Cooperation, to the representatives of the UN system, people from civil society. It is a pleasure to share this space with you. First of all, I thank the organization and the participation of colleagues from the UN system in Paraguay. Thank you for sharing your experiences and lessons learned with us. everyone for their comments, for their questions. Thank you. And also thank you for the answers. Thank you to my colleagues for that. This type of dialogue contributes to strengthening the ties of the Alliance for the International Cooperation. And above all, to promote this type of spaces is key for future actions that this committee seeks to carry out. From the government of Paraguay, we have established a roadmap for the National Development Program, Paraguay 2030, which is aligned with the SDGs and involves the participation of organizations and state entities and civil society. We believe that international cooperation is a valuable resource that complements the efforts made to meet the objectives in priority areas. Today, we have reflected on the importance of building a framework of cooperation between multiple actors. We have also identified challenges and opportunities. The next step is to strengthen multi-stakeholders alliances in the country. We know that this path has its ups and downs. However, it seems key to continue creating and strengthening these types of dialogue spaces that contribute not only to the challenges that we have to meet forward, but also to improve our management mechanism of international cooperation for development. From the technical committee, we welcome this type of initiatives and coordination between key actors that improves the ties of cooperation and also serves as an impulse to continue effective alliances to maximize the impact of the development for the recovery of the COVID-19 and the implementation of sustainable development goals. Thank you very much. Thank you, Ana, for this closing. And in this way, we closed this space. Thank you, everyone, for being here, the authorities, the colleagues present here. Thank you very much, and see you soon.